Mm.
Okay, let's get this session started. Now that all the panelists are here and a lot of attendees have joined, we've got over 50 people here, which is a great turnout. Thank you all for showing up this afternoon. I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see all the panelists here. Okay, so welcome to the session, Funding Solutions Journalism. A few housekeeping notes to begin with. We're probably going to go between 45 to an hour. Yeah, we'll have an opportunity for you all to share comments and to also ask some questions in the chat, which we'll tend to in the second half of this hour. I'm going to begin by introducing the panel, and then we'll move into a panel discussion with questions that I've prepared as your host today. And then, yeah, we'll move into the Q&A with the rest of the audience. So we welcome you all. I am the Revenue Project Manager at SJN. I've been running a pilot project called the Solutions Journalism Revenue Project for the past year. It's coming to an end in February, and we'll have plenty of insights to share with the rest of the media industry thereafter about how solutions journalism ties to revenue. Today, we're specifically talking about funding, philanthropic funding for solutions journalism. And this session really comes off the back of a piece, a blog post that was released on The Whole Story, which is the SJN's blog, that looks at how two funders in New Hampshire essentially brought solutions journalism to their state. And we're delighted to have some representatives of those two foundations with us today. I'll make the introductions in a minute. Yeah, the panel today is made up of both funders and journalism leaders, and we'll get their perspectives on the value of solutions journalism, which, just to remind you all, SJN is defined as being rigorous and evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. And the conversation will also explore why funders think it is important to fund solutions journalism and how they do it. And then on the other hand, we'll also hear why newsroom leaders pursue this journalistic practice and how they manage to secure funding for it. So joining us today, we have Jaquanda Johnson, who is founder and publisher of Flintbeat. And a quick disclosure here, Flintbeat is funded by SJN through the Revenue Project. We've got Karen Ager from the Endowment for Health, and she is the Communications Director for the foundation. We've got Kristen Oliveri, Vice President for Communications and Marketing at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Melanie Planda, who is the Director of the New Hampshire News Collaborative. And again, a full disclosure there that the project is supported by SJN Local Media Project with funding from the Knight Foundation. Finally, we have Tracy Powell, who is Program Officer at Borealis Philanthropy and running the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund. And there's another person on your screen, Leah Todd, who is my dear colleague at SJN, who will essentially be fielding questions in the chat, surfacing any comments, and will just unmute herself later on during the session to ask some questions on behalf of the audience to the rest of the panel. So thank you all for being here, and a really deep thank you to all of the panelists here. So I want to begin by asking a question to you, Karen, really about a bit of an origin story. So the blog post that we published last week tells a different story than the one we're perhaps most accustomed to hearing. So rather than highlighting how newsrooms successfully generated funding to support projects, the piece kind of shone a light on the role that funders play in supporting local journalism and specifically solutions journalism. And I would like to invite you to share your insights into the role that you and the Endowment for Health played in discovering solutions journalism and bringing this journalistic practice to New Hampshire.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Alec. And yeah, it really was a discovery project. Our involvement with SOJO began back in 2014 when the New Hampshire Endowment for Health went through a strategic planning process. And the board and our leadership quickly gave me the green light to go find a media partner for underwritten coverage so that we could start raising awareness about new issues that we were funding in, particularly in the healthy aging space. But I ended up asking for more time to properly research approaches before we dove into any kind of an agreement because I was really clear we didn't want just traditional coverage that focused solely on problems. So talked to many funders across the country and had good conversations, but it was really largely stuff we already understood. Things like you won't like every headline and making sure you have good guardrails set up in terms of the agreement before coverage starts, because of course the firewall for editorial independence goes up when coverage starts, as it should. But I had heard about solutions journalism at a national conference, and for me, the light bulb went off immediately because it just struck me as a credible approach, clearly rooted in journalistic practices, as far away as you could get from fluff or good news stories. So I thought that it might pass the laugh test, if you will, with our journalists in New Hampshire. I hoped it would. Um, and even at the time, solutions journalism was getting a lot of attention as a type of investigative journalism, and it was gaining traction in the country, but there was still a lot of skepticism. So we first planned a partnership with the Solutions Journalism Network and the New Hampshire Press Association to offer a day-long training on what this practice was all about. And we brought in a panel of journalists from all around the country to talk about how they were using SOJO as part of their practice. And much to my surprise, we were able to get 60 journalists and editors in the room. I didn't know we had that many in the state, and many of them stayed for the whole day. It also gave us a chance to kind of sniff out what media partners might have interest and readiness to do an actual specific project with us. So that eventually led to an agreement with the New Hampshire Union Leader, which is our state's largest newspaper, for a project on healthy aging called Silver Linings. That began in the summer of 2016 and ran for 2 years. Uh, we viewed it as very successful, a prolific amount of long-form, solution-based coverage done by a regional journalist, Pulitzer-winning journalists. And we did have some staff changeover in the reporter, but nonetheless, we really viewed the whole series as successful, and our advocates who were seeing the coverage coming out of this really felt like it was deep and meaningful coverage. But even as we were working through this agreement with the union leader, we did spend a lot of time with our board to make sure they completely understood what a media partnership was, what it wasn't. Obviously, that we weren't going to dictate coverage. We shouldn't be doing that. And to make sure that our board had our back in terms of respecting editorial independence. Since that time, I'll just say we've been really gratified seeing the practice of solutions journalism take root in New Hampshire, seeing other funders get involved. You'll hear from Kristen in a minute. Seeing newspapers find ways to do multiple reporting tracks using SOJO, newsrooms continuing to want training on the practice, and just seeing how collaborative journalism is taking root, as you'll also hear about. So we're now in our second underwritten partnership, this one also going for 2 years on civic engagement. It's called the Sunshine Project, and it's in partnership with the Laconia Daily Sun, one of our regional newspapers. And we're always exploring new content possibilities, such as, criminal justice and law enforcement, and exploring how we can partner on topics like this. We really view it as what I call a systems change for the news. And though we don't typically fund things indefinitely. We certainly want to take the long view on the importance of this kind of support for local journalism. So thanks for letting me say my piece, and I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Karen, for this great overview of how you came to discover solutions journalism and have worked with media partners to really make it happen in New Hampshire. So yeah, I want to turn to you, Kristen. You work for the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, and I'm interested to hear from you how you discovered solutions journalism for yourself and how you made the foundation support this work off the back of kind of pioneering foundations that Karen had set up with the New Hampshire Union Leader and then some other publications there. Sorry, you're muted, yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you for having me. So I'll just start by saying that similar to Karen, I had heard about the practice in the field at various conferences, but it really wasn't until Karen's event that really raised the awareness in the state. And I think I really look to the Endowment for Health as a leader in really bringing the practice and rooting it in the state and making it much easier for other funders to come into the equation because of the work that she had done with the union leader, just the conversations that they had setting up the agreements. It was much, much easier to sit down going into a conversation with the union leader, having been able to learn so much from Karen about lessons learned, things that I should look out for. It just gave us that much more confidence in going into an agreement like that.
This is something that we reflect on in the piece that was published a couple of weeks ago. It's really that funding for this journalistic practice has really generated more funding. And you talk about the fact that some of the agreements that were already established between one foundation and a media partner could be repurposed by yourselves and made you so confident that you could go ahead. So could you talk a little bit more about the kind of collaboration that exists between foundations? And this is also a question for you, Karen, and how you envisage yourselves as promoters of a practice and how you can position yourself to also disseminate that amongst other local foundations and philanthropic organizations.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, just having the agreement that was in place that the union leader had already worked through successfully with the endowment, it was a very similar relationship with the charitable foundation. So this was their second solutions journalism project. It was called Beyond the Stigma, and it focused on behavioral health and the addiction crisis in New Hampshire. And it was very helpful because when we sat down with the union leader, we were at the table, we were already talking about things like collaboration. So the charitable foundation coming in with funding, they had already brought other funders to the table. So we weren't going it alone. So it made the process much easier. Having that relationship with the endowment, having that open line of communication where I could bounce questions off of Karen, relationships make all the difference.
Yeah, I would echo that. You know, we are the kind of foundation, as many are, that although we may not fund something forever, we want to see the practice be sustainable and have a life of its own. And so to be able to play tag team with a counterpart like Kristen and the Charitable Foundation, Kristen's the reason I learned about the Granite State News Collaborative and all their great work. So it's just, you know, it's not only leveraging the funding, but it's also sharing ideas and understanding other ways that we can support journalism in our region.
Great, thanks. And I see a great question that is really topical coming up on the chat from Les Zeitz out in Oregon from the Malheur Enterprise. And he says, foundations are leery of supporting a commercial enterprise rather than a nonprofit. How did New Hampshire folks deal with that challenge? That's a question that we hear a lot in the industry. For-profit organizations feeling like they are not necessarily so primed to receive philanthropic funding. What's a common tool that you can get around that issue with? To let us know how you did that.
Yeah, we were fortunate to be able to have a nonprofit fiscal sponsor in both of our underwritten coverage partnerships. We're working with for-profit newspapers. In the case of the Union Leader, they had a charitable foundation and also a school of communication, both of which are nonprofits. And it now rests with their school of communication to serve as fiscal sponsor as a pass-through to the money, but it's the newsroom who's driving and managing the project. It's the reporter who's employed by the newsroom. In theory, a foundation like ours could fund a for-profit business, but there's all sorts of justification we would have to go through with the IRS and our board to do it. So we do prefer to have a nonprofit fiscal sponsor. And I know there are a bunch of different ways that it's been done, but that's how we've done it. Even the publisher of the Laconia Daily Sun, when we were finalizing negotiations, was ready to start a nonprofit so he could receive these funds. And he was very relieved to know we already had a fiscal sponsor who could serve that function, because newsrooms are, they're not experts on, the sausage making of nonprofit, financial pipelines. And so just to have that taken care of another way, but be reassured you're still managing the project and you're still calling the shots of the coverage and the reporter, I think put them at ease.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It's something that most newsroom leaders, editors, managing editors, publishers are not necessarily so that comfortable with. So having a supportive foundation to make that happen is definitely very welcome. So Tracy, I want to turn to you now. So we heard about the importance of solutions journalism for funders in New Hampshire. And I want to think a bit more broadly, other parts of the country and the media industry, and notably like with a lens focused on equity and newsrooms led by and serving people of color. Can you tell us what are your objectives with the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund? As a funder, what are your objectives, and where does solutions journalism fit in those objectives that you have?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund invests in news outlets led by and for people of color. And so that's our primary objective. We want to help those organizations, support them in building out capacity so that they will be able to go about the business of producing quality news and information for the communities they serve. In terms of supporting the journalism directly, again, it's about capacity building. So empowering and enabling these outlets to produce journalism. But when I think about solutions journalism and news outlets led by people of color in particular, the very survival of hyperlocal news outlets, particularly those led by and for people of color, depends on, I believe, producing solutions journalism, explanatory journalism, and investigative journalism. That's how they will differentiate themselves from the dominant media outlets located in their communities that have, for way too long, ignored communities of color. So these outlets that we support are not only covering people in their community, they are steeped in their community, they're immersed in their community, they're part of the community. And so they have these trusting relationships with folks in the community already. And so for me, I think that really assessing the needs and issues confronting these communities and then investing in ways to help to support these communities and identifying solutions that have worked in other places, I think that's how these outlets are going to sustain themselves. And I want to be, in the interest of total transparency, the other person on this panel, Jaquanda Johnson, the Flint Beat, is one of our grant partners. And so I'm really thrilled to see some of the kind of solutions journalism work that she's done in Michigan.
Tracy, and we'll come to Jaquanda in a minute to hear more about that really outstanding work. But I wanted to bounce back on one of the points that you just mentioned about building capacity. And you've told me that you provide training. You also have platforms to give advice to newsrooms and newsroom leader. This is something that the Endowment for Health has also done, convening trainings for journalists. Can you tell me a little bit more about, both of you from your respective perspectives, what you think is the role of funders in not just giving grants, but also helping build that capacity and the ways in which you think about making that happen?
Right. So we realized before the fund even launched that just given that the money can't solve all the problems. You have to actually have the resources in place to help folks execute and put that money to best use. And so we knew then we had to make sure we provided training around from everything from audience development and listening and sustainability to identifying new sources of revenue and funding, to even, extending technical support in terms of tools and technology that will enable them to do their, these outlets to do their jobs better. All of that came into play. And so we really listened to the publishers themselves, the founders themselves, and asked them, how do your communities consume information? And then how best can you serve that their information needs in the way that they consume using information? And so that's how we developed the programming and resources to help in terms of capacity and training.
That's great. Thanks, Tracy. Karen, do you have anything on your end to add to that?
No, I think Tracy covered it. That sounds great.
Yeah, it really is great to be able to provide that kind of capacity building in addition to just the money, which is, as you said, not enough, and building these deeper relationship with the grantees in that way. So turning to Jaquanda and Melanie now, you are both the newsroom leaders, and I'd like to invite you to tell us more about your work in general, and specifically in terms of the role that solutions journalism plays in defining your brand. Jaquanda, would you mind going first?
Problem. Thank you for having me. And yes, we are supported by Solutions Journalism Network and also, as Tracy mentioned, the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund. Because of things like that, we are able to more invest in our solutions work in our newsroom. So our team, except one staff member, has already been trained. He just came aboard maybe January 11th, I think was his first day. Because of the support with Reg, we have brought on 2 full-time reporters, in addition to that, a managing editor. And so we are able to train our team to get the work that we feel like is important done. Since then, I can't remember the count, but I know we did step up with our solutions work, paying closer attention to local government, breaking things down, more rigorous reporting about crime in Flint. We first found out about solutions in 2017 at Alliance Conference. Carolyn Robinson, she and I was walking, and she started to tell us about solutions. In 2018, she reached out to me and said, hey, we have funding for some of the work that you want to do in your community. Are you interested? And of course I was. And so we kicked off our first solution story January 2019. As Tracy mentioned, like things like this is really dire in communities like Flint, underserved communities, marginalized communities, communities that are looking for solutions. We have weekly news meetings. Solutions is part of that conversation. We try to work to identify stories that merit that type of journalism, and also some stories that we overlooked that may have been solution stories, and we're just doing work, and I think quality, good work in Flint that we didn't quite label that way. We talk about it all the time. We include it, I'm pretty sure, in every proposal that we put together. Everyone mentions that we do solutions because that is definitely part of our mission, and that is something that we do in our newsroom ongoing all the time. So I think now it's benefiting the community. We're trying to get some of the heavier, the larger funders to really buy into this work, like what it is and the impact that it has. And so we're working on measuring those things and what it looks like and what the community is saying, and just trying to be more strategic about the work that we're doing here in Flint to gain more financial support.
Thanks, Shaquanda. And can you spend a bit of time talking about the response that you've received from the audience, from people who, you know, have kind of seen your solutions journalism and noted the difference that it's made and give you some feedback?
So the community members, we have this, we are embedded in Flint. And so I'm like ears on the ground all the time. The community members, they, you know, they can reach the publisher. That's basically what it is. They can email me, they can call me, they send me messages. We've been, according to the community, they like it. Like we've have been, they appreciate that we don't recycle press releases. I know one of our more recent works was a 3-part analysis of the mayor's plan to tackle crime. He sent out a press release and held a press conference, and the rest of the news agencies, they kind of ran with that. They didn't take a deeper dive as to would this even work for Flint. And some of it, in reporting, we really don't think it will work. People have tried it, it doesn't work, right? And so the audience have said they really appreciate that type of work, and also work that shows them that they can do better. Like they can do these grassroots movements in order to do better in their neighborhoods. Right now, we have a group that they are working to do some program similar to Violence Interrupters in Flint, and we're in conversation with them to see what that looks like, because of course we want to be part of it. We want to see what this looks like for them. And we started the conversation here in the city in January about what that looks like in other communities, including New York and Chicago. With the support of Solutions, we were able to make that happen. I think they see a difference in the reporting and they appreciate it. The numbers show it. We get higher traffic when we produce solutions pieces. We just really started monitoring that. We're building out another solutions page. We have a new website that we kicked off late last year, and we haven't really built out our solutions page like it was before. So we're still working on that so we can push that out separately if people just want solutions, and then some other things just to really market what we're doing with solutions work, including developing an email newsletter and what that looks like in Flint. But so far, readers like it. Some of the potential funders, they see it. We've just had one meeting with the community foundation here, and we're scheduling a second meeting with them. We also had a meeting with another foundation here that we were in talks with last year about supporting the work. COVID hit and they scaled back some of their funding efforts. And we are still in talks with a local university about what that looks like. After COVID hit, they kind of scaled back some things, but they have invested a little money in our work here and Solutions specifically. So I think that it'll really grow more this year as we push it out more. And I anticipate to get funding specifically for solutions work from some of these bigger funders here in our city.
Thanks for breaking all that down, Shaquanda. That's great. And I really recommend that 3-part series by reporter Amy Diaz on the mayor's program, looking at reducing gun violence in the city and the work that was done there with a solutions angle to look at what was being done elsewhere and really providing some scrutiny to that. Those proposals by the local mayor was really outstanding. Melanie, I'd like to turn to you, and same question. Tell us more about your work in general, and specifically about solutions journalism and the role it plays with regards to the collaborative.
Sure. So the Greenland State News Collaborative is a collective of roughly 17 media organizations, media community and educational organizations across the state of New Hampshire. And I believe we might still be the only statewide collaborative, which is no easy feat, as you can imagine. So, because all different parts of New Hampshire have all are different from each other. And I think that's the way all the outlets kind of treated each other, was that these are all separate countries in the same state. And once the idea of solutions kind of came into view and we started learning about it, separately, it opened up this idea that we were not separate. Actually someone in Conway might have something valuable to add to someone in Keene, you know, which is clear across the state from each other. So that concept of solutions, I'd say, just from a journalism point of view, it was intriguing, and it also made a whole lot of sense. Like it was the answer to readers for years and years always saying, why can't you write anything good? Why can't you say good news? And even though Solutions is not fluffy puppy dog stories, what I think they really mean is, because we wrote plenty of good news stories, we wrote plenty of puppy dog stories and the Eagle Scout stories and all of that stuff. What they were saying is, if all you tell us is what's wrong and never tell us what might be going right, or that there's at least someone trying to do something and here's what it looks like, it makes you feel overwhelmed as a reader. And I think that's what the readers are really trying to say. We're overwhelmed. This problem is too big because all you're telling me is it's a problem. And so when you can still do rigorous journalism, you're still doing investigative journalism, and you're giving readers what they're actually asking for, which is not an end to a conversation, not a constant barrage of problems, but something that's actually being done. Well, that's a real attractive prospect to a journalist, because it has all the parts, it has all the stuff that you want to do. And then so that I think really appealed to the folks in New Hampshire. It also was what I know it was what brought us together as a collaborative, because it opened up this idea that, okay, well, maybe you could, work with someone from a different part of the state, because especially if you're asking the question, who's doing it better, you're looking to different places for examples of solutions that you can test. Well, you could have that right in your own state, or there's a reason to work on it together. So I think that's what sort of brought us together, made us all feel like we could dip our toes in and kind of start working together. And the ripple effects of that are just huge in our collaborative, to be honest with you. And it is what helped us get through the crisis of the pandemic, because we were all willing to work together because of this, because we could see now the value in running a story from some other place in our state that focused on, hey, here's how the Seacoast is handling town meeting, because we're all going to have to figure out how to get together or not get together. Here's what they're doing. We could run that in some other place in the state. We were able to pool this content. We were able to conserve resources when all of our outlets were hemorrhaging people. It was a horrible time for our outlets, but we were able to come together, put aside, decades of like rivalry and competition, put it aside, see the value in running each other's content and stories about what people were doing and how our state was responding in this crisis. To our editors' credit, they were willing to do it, and they were not only willing to do it, they were willing to write editors' notes to their readers, telling them, you're going to see stories from outside of our very narrow local area, and that's a good thing. You're getting more information. And they were using it as a value add to their readers, which I thought was huge. And so because of that success, because we were able to help them save resources, people during a crisis were able to get good information all over our state. It became really easy then to kind of, okay, where can we spread out? What other stuff can we cover together? So, and we were now all paying attention to what each other was doing in a really big way. So now, once we had protests, of course, the racial justice marches across our state. That's not really something we saw in New Hampshire before, but now we saw it because we were all watching it and we were all seeing it together. We saw it as a story and as a thing that was going to be impactful and important to our state. So we all said, hey, let's Let's share that too. Let's work on that too. Let's see what's being done. Let's share those stories too. General election, same thing. First time in the entire history of the state of New Hampshire, outlets from competing outlets worked together to cover a general election. Why was that important? Because what we focused on was disinformation. We took pieces of dis and misinformation that were out there and wrote specific stories saying, here's how absentee voting works in our state. Here are the safeguards in place. Where there was fear, we were able to work together and share stories in wide distribution, dispelling myth, dispelling rumor, offering actual explainer information that people needed so they wouldn't be scared to go vote, you know? So we were able to do that. And I firmly believe Solutions started that. And had we not had that focus, had we not been introduced to that, had we not, and honestly, had we not had the financial support and backing of folks who are really strong supporters of ours, none of this would have been possible. And now we're, you know, it's just amazing. It's honestly amazing. And the last thing I'll say is, I think also in terms of our readers, viewers, and listeners, and the communities that we're trying to reach that we maybe haven't been able to reach before, I do feel like this helps build trust. And this is my favorite example of this. We wanted to put out, there wasn't any COVID information to speak of that was easy to find in Spanish when COVID really hit. So we were like, well, we can't have that. So let's do something about that. Let's work together and figure out a way. So we tried to put out COVID related content in Spanish, but we also convened a group of leaders in the Latinx community across New Hampshire, and just listened to them and really tried to understand, you know, ask the question, what do you need? And it evolved into a conversation about the media and how the media portrays their community in our state. And they kept saying, and this has been repeated by other communities, you only come to us when there's something bad. You only come to us when you want to talk about immigration or someone's done something wrong. And that is the picture you paint of us to our state. And that's not good. and then don't do that. Why are you do that? That's harmful. And number one, all we could say was you're right. And we didn't realize that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. But then we could also say, but here's how we're gonna cover this. Here's how we're gonna try to cover your community. We're gonna focus on responses. We're gonna focus on what are proposed solutions. And we explained it. And we explained where we were coming from and the lens we were using. And around the table, they said, yes, that's it. And from there, we were able to have conversations. They weren't always easy, but I felt like that was one of the things that helped us start to build that trust with a community that we really do want to listen to. We really do want to reach. And so I felt in that instance, that was one of the ways that it helps, you know, it just does. So I'll shut up there. That was our story.
Thanks, Melanie. Well, it's really great to hear how solutions journalism was really like at the core of a shift in practices, both in terms of how it brought newsrooms to work together, but also in thinking about the way in which journalists and their publications serve their communities, and re-envisage thinking about building that trust, engaging, and that's really crucially important and certainly part of the ethos of what solution journalism seeks to promote. So I would like to ask you both, Jaquanda and Melanie, to reflect on what is it that you think is important to do when cultivating relationships with funders. Jaquanda, you touched on that quite substantially already. Melanie, you received some more funding for your work during after the pandemic hit, very much kind of off the back of all the work that you had done prior to that was very much carried by the solutions journalism work. Could you talk about how you communicate to funders about the work that you do and nurture those relationships before and after they've given you grants?
Do you want me to go first or Jaquanda? Sorry. Do you want me to go first or Jaquanda?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking Jaquanda that. Why don't you go first, then Melanie, and then Jaquanda can pick it up. Sorry.
Okay.
So that's a good question. So I was thinking about that, and I think the only answer, and I don't know if it's a helpful one, but whenever I have to speak to a funder about something we're doing, um, you know, I want it to be something that we really need, you know, that it's an actual need that I can believe in, that I can tell funders about, that I can say, this is an actual need, here's exactly where it's going to go. And here is the success that we have to show that we will be good stewards of these funds. So that's how I approach any funder anywhere. And then I think that because I think solutions is always at the forefront of how I talk about the collaborative, because I think that, you know, for example, over the summer, or not the summer, but early in the pandemic, when we were seeking funding to help hire freelancers, fact is, to do solutions journalism, to do that kind of in-depth reporting, you need people, and it takes time, and it takes longer than your one-off, you know, here's the daily news, here's the events of the day kind of story. And I think the funders who understand solutions journalism get that. And at the time, what was happening was, again, our outlets were so inundated with just the daily news that really my pitch came from a very honest place, which was, if we are going to talk about solutions journalism, we're going to talk about responses. You need people who are able to take a minute and actually do that reporting. So in that sense, I think that was my pitch. We needed to be, and while the outlets themselves were busy with the day-to-day, the collaborative freelancers could provide all of those outlets with that farther looking, where are the responses, where are other, we had the luxury of that time to be able to look to other states. One of the examples, other states, we had, you know, because we had started researching it, other states were using hotels to house homeless people. We had a huge homeless population at one point just living outside, in front of, you know, in downtown Manchester, New Hampshire. You know, so this was an issue that was happening right in our city. So we could go and we could do that research. We could make those calls. We could produce that story, and then everybody had access to it. So in that sense, it was something that we could provide that the outlets at the time were not going to be able to do. So I think that's where, so in terms of cultivating that relationship, I think whenever we ask for funding, I always try to think of, where is the need? How can we put that money to the best and the biggest bang for the buck, essentially? Like, how can the most people benefit from this, and how can I present that argument? And, you know, how are we filling that need with those funds so that we're good stewards of the funds? And then in cultivating the relationship, that's it. I gotta say, with the funders that we've been very lucky. We keep in regular contact, which is nice. And it's nice that, I mean, we can just kind of reach out, or they'll ask, like, hey, how you doing? It's really nice that way. And I'm never at a loss for words for what we're doing, because I really am proud of it and love it. So I tend to talk about it a lot. So that's how I cultivate it. I just say, hey, you want to hear what we're doing now? Just cause want to see what, you know, what good this funding did, and I'm genuine in it. So that's how I do.
That's good to hear. And I think it does come down to having good relationship with the funders and being able to share updates and have, you know, a good ongoing sort of flow of an exchange there. Gioconda, why don't you, from your perspective, what are the top tips that you think of when cultivating relationships with funders and donors?
The best tip I can give you is to introduce yourself and stay at the table as much as possible. It's about cultivating those relationships. And I mean, I was at every conference, every panel, in people's faces, just to say who I was, you know. And I remember in 2017, I awkwardly stood up at an ONA panel, and that's where Tracy was, and that's how she met me. Introduced myself. It was one of the most nervous things I've ever done. And I looked up, there was a line of people waiting to speak to me. So you have to be vocal. You have to tell your story. And I'm still not good at it. I get fussed at all the time, but you have to tell it over and over and over again. And another thing I do, sometimes I ask people if it's okay if I sign them up for our email newsletter so they can see our work. So far, every person that I've asked that, they have not unsubscribed from it. So that means they're looking. I send personal emails to people just to say, hey, how are you? This is where we're at, giving people updates. So it's just about having some type of stewardship plan in place and cultivating that relationship and not expecting anything to happen tomorrow. Because I get it, we fill out proposals and we do applications and then we don't get it. Sometimes it's because you haven't built a relationship and they don't know who you are. And it's about 50 other people of applicants that's been in their face all the time, always there. And even if it's something small like speaking on a panel, I try to make sure I do that for the people who support me, especially. So I'm always there. That's the best advice I can give you. It's not a simple thing, it's a journey, but that's the best advice I have. So
I have to absolutely say Jaquanda is 100% right. Like, I never say no to anything. And I don't care what I have going on that day. If there's a chance to talk about it, I'm going to do it. And I don't care who it's to. I don't care what group it is. I'm going to talk about it because you never know. You never know. And it also helped you just better understand what you're doing and who you are so you can explain it over and over again. And someone will hear it and you'll hopefully get there. Totally right, Jaquanda.
That's great advice. So persistence is really the name of the game at this point. One last question, and I know we've got plenty of excellent other questions from all the audience in the chat. So we'll come to that in a second. But one that is really burning is a question of editorial independence. And how do you as newsroom leaders navigate maintaining that firewall that Karen was speaking about earlier? How do you make sure that the funders don't have a say in what you're going to be producing editorially, especially when it comes to the solutions journalism? They're not going to dictate what kind of response they want to see, what they want you to cover and present as solutions. So that's like an interplay that needs to be navigated. I saw that Jay Aldrich shared a really great resource in the chat, a document that really sets out how they communicate their expectations and define the boundaries when asking for money from potential funders, not necessarily institutions, but private businesses as well. And Jay, I remember an anecdote from a presentation that he gave, asked his own team of reporters, what will make you feel gross in receiving money from funders and sponsors, and how do you want to navigate this relationship, and what are the really sort of big red lines that we're going to mark in the sand that will not be crossed? So how do you all think about that? This is a question that is open to all the panel.
Oh, we have an editorial independence policy on our site, and we're very clear about it when we're talking to funders. It doesn't come up often though, because so far we've tapped into organizations that fund journalism. They know about journalism, right? Now we're having conversations with some funders who don't, and we're just clear about it. This is what it is, and you do not have a say in what goes on editorially. And if they have a problem with it, maybe they shouldn't fund us because it's not going to change. So that's very, very clear in our discussions. And I do think that the last meeting that we had, they kind of walked away wondering, were we a good fit for them? Which is okay, because they have funded some news projects in the past, but they've had say. This time they don't. And both my editor and I are like, it's just not going to happen. So they have to make some decisions for themselves. But I think the work is valuable. And if they are sticking to their mission, they should invest in our work. And I do have a tendency to say things like that to people. So we'll see what happens.
That's been our experience too. Like, mostly the funders we work with, they have a really good understanding and never had a funder ever try to suggest anything, but that always could be around the corner. And I think being clear is 100% right. We have an independence policy, but also we're pretty, like, our editorial meetings, those are like kind of sacrosanct. Like, no one really is allowed in, so like we kind of like set up those rules, and we've also had it where we sort of, if we were going to be if it was a topic based thing that we were going to go try to get funding from, we would have that topic first. Like we already had the thing that we were pitching like first, so that there was that thing where we came up with this and this is what we're asking for specifically. So in that sense, like they weren't influencing, what topics we were choosing, but like I said, we haven't had any incidents where that was an issue, but it always could.
Thanks. Any input from any of the funders in the room at this point?
Yeah, I would just add that Tina Rosenberg from SJN was actually adamant when the union leader hired the reporter that, you should probably just have Karen pop in and meet her and see what was the, nexus of wanting to fund this and kind of get a sense of what they care about. We've been super careful and always saying, like, if we ever go too far, if we ever do something where you feel that's crossing the line, you need to let us know and we will respect that. And we've also offered, and just to say, would it be valuable to you if we were to put together 4 or 5 subject matter experts as you start to get up to speed on your beat? This is not a have to, but we offer it. And in both series, that seemed to be welcome. But as far as knowing what the reporter's covering or picking up the phone and going, cover X, Y, or Z, we never do it. And we see the article when the rest of the public sees it. But it's been a respectful relationship of saying, like, would it be okay to invite you to this big meeting? We think you would get a lot of information on what you're covering. And 9 times out of the 10, the reporter would come and see value out of that. And even say, you're allowed to pitch me a story. I'm just not going to necessarily promise I'll cover it. We've never pitched though. We try to stay out of that. Some of our advocates, we work with the advocates too in a specific subject matter area to say, just because the endowment's funding this and you work with us, does that mean we have a reporter in our pocket? So if you want to pitch the reporter, you have no guarantee of coverage. So just know that. But I would say we don't feel like we're not allowed to interact. Like if we see a reporter at an event, or as I say, we want to introduce them to somebody, there seems to have been openness to that.
Yeah, thanks for outlining what a healthy relationship looks like, one that doesn't overstep any boundaries. So Leah, we're already 5 minutes to the hour. Time has flown by, but I really want you to have an opportunity to elevate some of the great questions that came through in the chat. So
yeah, thank you, Alec. And thank you everybody in the chat and in the Q&A. I've been doing my best to alert folks when we're answering your questions live, but we do have a couple that have not been raised yet. So I want to ask to the journalists in the room and the funders, how do you talk about your impact and describe that to your audience and also to your funders as well? And this is a question coming from Rich Weiss in Ohio.
That's a great question that I warned the panel we would be tackling. So I'm glad it came from the chat.
I mean, whenever it is hard to measure direct impact. It is. And I can believe in my heart of hearts that the fact that, again, we wrote a story about other states using hotels to house homeless, that all the outlets ran it for a long time. And then some places around New Hampshire started either looking into it or doing it. I can hope in my heart and think maybe we had some impact there, that maybe that happened because of the story people see in the stories, but I don't know. There's not always a direct link, and audiences don't always tell you. It's more anecdotal. I will say I've seen more like tangible impact within our journalism ecosystem, and more people using solutions approaches, even ones that were exposed to it earlier, using it more often, and us being willing to share, and now being co-producing stories and working on breaking news events together. Like, I think all of that came out of this idea of solutions. And I think that is something tangible that we can measure. But the other impact, it's hard.
I think I think the best thing that I've seen around impact is a conversation that happens before the stories even come out. And so you talk with the community and you talk amongst yourselves, hopefully together, and you say, what do you want this story or stories to do? How do you want the community or your audience to use it? And then you also establish maybe some benchmarks and say, hey, if this story is, would it be a bad story, or will we have failed if all that happens is the story is published and nobody says anything about it? Is it a good story if we get calls into the editor or letters to the editor? In other words, it starts some kind of conversation. Did we spur the community to arrange a town hall based on our coverage to talk amongst themselves about what's going on and to reach some type of solution? Did we change a law? Is there a new state or federal or local policy that resulted from our storytelling? Did we move people to do something? Did the number, if you're talking about, police deaths, did the numbers go down as a result of the reporting that we shared about some solutions type program that might be beneficial? So when I look at impact as a funder, those are some of the things that I'm looking for. And I'm also looking to see if there's an indication or whether the publisher has communicated to me that the conversation has even taken place within their newsroom and or with their community. I think that helps me measure impact.
Thanks, Tracy. And those are very much aspects that we at SJN also tend to look at when assessing impact. Leah.
Yes, do we have time for one more question, Alec?
Yeah, let's do one more and then wrap it up.
Good. This is a good one. There are lots of questions coming through that have to do, I'd say they fall in the category of just getting started. When you're new to fundraising, when funders are new to funding journalism, how do you approach those first couple of conversations? So I've tried to sort of synthesize several questions. And I think the way to ask it is best summed up from Les, who put this question in the chat. What are the most frequently asked questions that you receive, Jaquanda, Melanie, the journalists in the room? And from the funder's perspective, what are the most frequent questions that you ask? Just maybe briefly, we can hear from each person before we sign off.
Okay, from funders specifically, they just want to know about us. It's weird because it's not some specific question that's so finite. It's usually just a conversation, and that's how it starts. They want to know about who we are, sometimes my backstory. Why am I so invested in this work? Because my journey has been very difficult. Because I was a one-man show by myself, and they want that story to see just how invested I am in this, right? And so it starts with that conversation. Through that conversation, they find out what we're focused on, what our mission is, why that's our mission. They find out about our team. And so it just starts that way. And sometimes it might lead to other questions, but it's more about our personal stories as to why we're doing this, why we're so invested in local journalism in general, why we're invested in solutions work. They might ask some basic questions like, just like now, what is the community saying about the work that we've done? Who else is supporting this type of work that we're doing? And so if you are really invested in your agency and your mission, that's probably the easiest conversation that I have before asking people for money. It's not scripted. I know it through and through. Every day I walk it. And the people on my team, they're clear about it and they walk it. And so it's simply just a conversation.
Jaquanda just made my eyes well up because I totally just very much relate to the last thing she just said. And I think that's very true. And I think that's the selling point. At the end of the day, you just believe in it. And that's hard. I know that's not like specific advice or anything, but I think that's true. And all the conversation, having a conversation, I think that's right. And some specific questions we usually get asked are about sustainability and who else is funding, who else is supporting you, and all good questions and all good things that you should be thinking about anyway on your own to just know the answers to that and be thinking that through before anyone asks you, I think. But yes, everything Jaquanda said.
As a funder, I think that the first question I ask is, do you know who your audience is? Do you know who you're reaching? Do you know who you aren't reaching? Do you know how they consume information, and are you producing information in the way that they consume it? And the other question, I think most importantly, what's the first thing on your reader's mind, your reader, listener, viewer's minds when they wake up in the morning? Because that lets me know that you really know who you're talking to every day and with your coverage. And so, yeah, I think that's the most important question. Are you producing news and information that's useful to the folks that you're trying to reach?
Thank you, Tracy.
I can go next. Just a few of the things that I had jotted down just about when we're thinking about considering to support projects, just is the work that you're doing in alignment with what the charitable foundation focuses on? Because we have an endowment, we have dollars, but it also has to align with the grant purpose of a lot of those funds. So, and we don't have a lot of unrestricted funding. So alignment is one thing. Collaboration, how many other folks are involved in the work? Can we get other funders involved? And just how will the work be leveraged? And I think that was one of the exciting things about the Granite State News Collaborative, because it's funding this entity, but it's benefiting media outlets across the state. And then lastly, I just want to say one of the most important things, and somebody already said it, it's starting the conversation. I know about the organizations that are out there, but I don't always know about the specific projects you're working on. So if there are things that you're bouncing around, I would love to just sit and talk with you and get updated on what's on your plate.
Yeah, and a follow on to what Kristen is saying about that conversation. I bit my nails and was really nervous about approaching a media outlet for our first underwritten coverage project until I started getting on webinars and going to conferences and hearing that journalists are also biting their nails about how to start a conversation with funders. So, start from the assumption that it's more likely than not if a funder would love to have a conversation with you about ways to work. Certainly when we approach a media outlet kind of cold, even though we might have an idea for what we want to do, we go slow. I mean, we expect this will be months of chatting with no particular rush, and we start our conversation out with, what does your newsroom need? We know there are a lot of challenges. It's hard to keep a newsroom going. There's financial, there's, doing deep coverage when, you're strapped for capacity. So just tell us what you need and what is it you care about. And then slowly start to talk about what we care about and try to find a sweet spot, understanding that maybe only part of what we care about and you care about is going to mesh into something that's got some legs to it. And so we try to just keep open-minded and be in an exploration and take our time. And, to the point of relationships with funders, I mean, I learned about the Granite State News Collaborative through Kristen and her organization's funding of them. we had Melanie in, and she is a fireball, as you can see. Had her come in and meet our president. We had no immediate need or ability to fund them, but the collaborative's gotten involved with other trainings we've done for journalists. They've lent their good name and credibility. We did one on trust and truth in the digital age. And it's their convening power that got journalists in the room. So, Melanie was willing to play in our sandbox even though there was no money in it. Now we're actually talking about grants with them, but it took like, I don't know, 2 years of just getting to know each other and finding ways to interact before we found an intersection where it was time to talk about projects.
Thank you for all these really incredible insights and best practices that really are applicable for all the funders that attended this session and listened in to understand how to think of supporting journalism, solutions journalism in particular, and also newsroom leaders. There were some really great nuggets of insights from Melanie and Jaquanda here. So we're gonna wrap it up here. We're already quite past the hour. Thank you to everyone who stuck around in attendance all the way through. And a really huge thank you to Kristen, Karen, Tracy, Melanie, and Jaquanda for making some time to share your insights and knowledge with us today. It was really extremely valuable. And it's so valuable that I think we will have to do something like this again sometime soon. So thank you for showing up, and yeah, we'll be in touch. And I'll save the chat and try and answer any outstanding questions and getting in touch with some of the attendees and participants who asked questions that were unanswered.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Talk to you
very
soon.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.